Hello, guys. David Vose again today. Oh, what a beautiful day. The snow's just about gone, and it's getting up into the 50s. But we still got a little weather left to get through. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I want to keep my promise and jump right back into this history. I know it could be boring, and I know that video I did yesterday was really long. I'll try to keep it shorter today, but we have to squeeze the information in that we can because we've got to cover a lot of history. I'm going to try to make it simple, but it seems like if you go onto the internet and you try your best, you try your darndest to figure out the lineage of the Languedoc and who these people were, you won't be able to find any information. And you won't be able to keep any of these people straight. There are various groups. There's the original Gauls that were in France. There's claims that many of those individuals were Sephardic Jewish people that were already there. And then we have the legends of the people themselves, many of them, and books that purport to be scripture and histories. And, a lot of people say, oh, legends. Yeah, but it's on the coat of arms. It's in their heraldry. It is not something that we can easily gloss over. This area of the Languedoc and up through the Rhine River up to Lyons and Montpellier was certainly ruled over by a group of individuals that we don't have any lineage of. There is no lineage, but the history says that royal lineage was started by Joseph, a son of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. But it seems like somebody's burned all this information. They didn't want you to know because right away you've got the Franks, and you got to just try and figure out, okay, who are the Franks? Are they lineal descendants of Christ too, or did they mix? Well, eventually, some of these individuals did mix and probably wanted the blood of Christ, so it may have carried on in certain lines, but you find out as we go that these Goths that took over Rome in 405 were also taking over all of Gaul. And we get down to a group of people that seem to be more Gothic. And this is where people get into this line of the Merovingian kings, which were really primarily Bavarians that had already taken over this group. Think about it. If it were truly the lineage of Jesus Christ and real knights that had sworn an oath to be poor or to live a virtuous life and to protect the Holy Grail, they wouldn't have been warring and fighting and trying to take over kingdoms. So very early on, around 400 or 500, these lineages got taken over, but there was a lineage. And I can prove this, I believe. Well, I don't know how much proof it is, because unless it's etched in gold on a stone on the Great Pyramid, how many of you are going to believe it? But there's a lot of proofs. There's a lot of things, and triangulate we will. Just like geometry, you may not know certain things, but if you have enough information, you can triangulate the information. And I do believe that we can find the answers. So we mentioned the other day that we found an Anjou, and we need to look into the descendants and the ancestors of this Anjou, because this is going to be pivotal in trying to figure out the line back to Christ. If you notice here, I pulled up this AI overview. It says the Anjou line or lineage in France includes multiple dynasties that ruled the region of Anjou, which is in western France. Now it says founded by Ingilger, son of Robert the Strong, included Fulk I the Red, who drove the Normans out of the region. Okay, well, that sounds good. He's driving out the Normans, right, from Normandy, these Germanic tribes. A branch of Capetian dynasty. Now, they always go back to the Capetian dynasty. or Capetian dynasty. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And included is Charles I of Anjou, who ruled Naples and Sicily. Also included Charles V of Anjou, who died in 1481. Okay, I don't know who these people are, right? This is where are we going with this? Are we going to be able to figure any of this out? We can't seem to figure out any of these guys' ancestors, and we don't know where the root of the Capetian dynasty was. But notice this, the third dynasty that stems from Anjou is a branch of the house of Valois. A branch of the house of Valois. Some members ruled Naples for a time. So, now we're getting somewhere, and I'll tell you why. The word Valois means valley. You probably know that I've been talking a lot about Peter Waldo. They seem to use that pronunciation or spelling quite a bit in history. But if you use that, you're going to get fooled, because this man is in other literature by other names. We've talked about this Parcival or Percival, which is Peter in French. Pierre is from Peter. So the vowel and the end means, it's the root of our word in English, valley. And it comes down through all these different languages, so it's going to have different spellings. Valois is also the same word, valley. And it refers to a location. Whenever they go back to this word, they always say it doesn't refer to any human or any person, but it goes back to a place or a valley. And then we always talk about the Albigensians and the Waldensians. The Waldensians were people who followed Waldo, or, like I say, it could be Pierre Valdez, spelled that way, Percival, which is in the romance of the German and the French romance novels of King Arthur and the Prince Pierre Valdez, or Percival. So he is in what I would consider scripture. The legends of King Arthur are spiritual and sacred texts that may be a little parabolic, but are literally describing the history of a prince who had a round table. And his name, of course, is Val, Pierre Val, or Percival. So we have some proof that there is a person, a Peter, that may mean kind of like a pope, because a lot of these names are titles. But either way, whether it's the pope or whether it's a guy named Peter, Pierre, or Percy, he is identified as the reigning prince who will come and kiss the princess and restore the kingdom. It is not to be lost in translation, friends. This is the whole thing that we're looking at. The great prince of this round table, or the 12 disciples and the apostles that went to southern France, and that lineage prince who is trying to defeat the enemy and the dragon and protect the princess, which is, as I said, King John the Presbyter. And also they use the historical references that we find is also about Lazarus. And also within all of this, they always mention Joseph of Arimathea. Now, it's interesting that Joseph of Arimathea is the one who had the boats that had 10 mines in Peru, and we've talked about that. So he would have then had the ability to take the royal family overseas, even further at some point. And I suspect they had to flee to protect the Holy Seed as far away from human beings as they could. By the time we get down to this Anjou or whatever, and they're fighting wars and mixing with the Bavarians, I don't think we're really in the territory of Jesus Christ and his true lineage. And I really discount the whole Merovingian line thing, although I do believe that the Merovingian line has blood from Jesus. And this is something they were very proud of, because remember, anyone who rules the world's got to have all these bloodlines, these royal bloodlines. And they would definitely want the royal bloodline from Jesus Christ. But it's also mingled, because we've talked about how Charlemagne, that created the Holy Roman Empire, went to Baghdad and got a descendant of Jeconiah and brought them over. And so there's confusion about the bloodline of this Jewish line that goes back to Baghdad that was brought over by Charlemagne, who started the Holy Roman Empire, and a bloodline that was of Jesus. Not just rumored, but officially in their legends and in all their heraldry and everything that they believe as Cathars. And the whole purpose of the Knights Templars and the Knights of St. John is to preserve this lineage of Jesus Christ, the Holy Grail, which you take the G on Grail and you put it to the San, then you have Sang Real, which actually is the holy bloodline of Christ that they were protecting. And the holy bloodline of Christ would be the womb of Mary Magdalene. So, Valois, so let me show you something quickly here. Here on the Goggle Brothers, it says, the name Valois has a long French heritage that first began in the northern region of Normandy. The name is derived from when the family lived at Valois in Normandy. This place name is extremely common in France and is derived from the Old French word Valois, meaning valley. So it is a word that not only looks like Val and kind of has the word Val or Waldensian in it. It is the basis for the Waldensians because they were the people of the valley. Now, why were they called the people of the valley? Well, this takes a lot of digging, friends, and I've been doing this for years, and I've determined that this word valley refers to, when you lived in those days in France, the valley referred to the Rhone Valley, which is Marseille and west along the coast from Narbonne over to Montpellier, and then up the Rhone River all the way up to Lyon, and eventually to Paris. And from there you can go a little bit to the right and go all the way up to Geneva. But this was the area of the Alps, and so they were also called the Albigensians. But they were also the people of the mountain and the people of the valley. And they were the Cathars. There were no other people. They were all believing the same basic teachings, and they all had their traditions going back to Mary. Now, there was a descendant from this valley area that was powerful. They did not believe that they were kings. They didn't call themselves kings like people that came after years later and had these wars. They were peace-loving people. Peter Waldo, or Peter of the Valley, didn't claim to be a king, but he had a lot of wealth, and it says he was the wealthiest person in that area. He was wealthy because of his lineage. And the people followed him because the Waldensian religion states that they are descendants of the apostles. And they did believe that they were descendants of Mary Magdalene and all of these legends. So if you look it up, they're going to say, oh, well, the Waldensians weren't the same thing as the Cathars. It was just some group of individuals that followed a man named Waldo. Okay, his name wasn't Waldo. His name was Pierre, and he was that particular Pope or Peter, or, perhaps his name was Pierre, but I think it's more of a title because you get it in the romance novels with Pierre Valdez or Percival as the Great Prince. So we know that this Peter of the valley would be very wealthy because he would be a descendant of Jesus and Mary Magdalene and the mother of the Lord, which, as we said, had great wealth from Egypt and Persia. And they kept their wealth in this little area called Languedoc and then moved north up the Rhone, but that's when the Holy Roman Empire was trying to vie with them for prominence because they went and got their own Jewish descendant from Jeconiah, from Baghdad. When Charlemagne did that and married that man to his aunt, they created these lineal descendants, which I think also did marry into the line of Jesus. But it doesn't matter because Jesus did not intend to have a lineal line of people that would come down to a man who would be king of the world necessarily. if there is somebody who would be born on earth, maybe, we know that Jesus is going to return. We know the apostles are coming. If any of these people would be born, they might certainly incarnate into a certain specific line, which we will show didn't stay there in Europe, but went over to America. And it may take several videos to get all this information out. So, and it's hard for me to just keep it all straight to tell you, but we just know then that there's this tradition, and they're claiming the Waldensians are different, and yet they're still the house of Valois. We're going to show you is the house of this Capetian, and they admit that the word Valois doesn't mean the man's last name, but it means the valley, and it's a specific valley in France. Now, why would it be called the valley? Because it's all the way up the Rhone, from Marseille, Narbonne, to Arles, all these places that you hear about, which was originally the Languedoc, and then moving north from there over the years. Somewhere along the line, the lines were taken over, and they were murdering people and crucifying them. And one man, he was the wealthiest person, Peter of the Valley, the Valois line has to be, who claims descent from the apostles and his teachings from these Cathar traditions. Okay, maybe there was a man named Peter Waldo who had people who loved him and were following his leadership. But the Waldensians were, if you look in history, you'll find that they existed before Peter Waldo. It literally is the teachings of the Cathars. They weren't coming to wipe out a man named Peter Waldo. They were coming to wipe out a man who was a descendant of Jesus Christ, who had thousands and millions of people that all had one hope, one faith, one baptism, did not believe in the Pope, and traced their lineage back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. But Peter Waldo owned 176 cities, towns, and villages along the Rhone. Basically, he owned all these cities along the Rhone. Now, how could one man do that? Because he was some particular leader or descendant that didn't like to say he was king. Because what he did was he gave all of his wealth and created this group, the poor Waldensians. Well, the poor is the same word that they've been using for themselves since they were there in Jerusalem. The Ebionites were called the poor, and it meant those who willingly gave up this material realm and sought true happiness in the methods that Jesus taught us, to have no worry about tomorrow and to have all things common. So it meant to have all things common. It meant the poor, or those who live in a village, sharing the resources and nobody owning anything. It was a tradition that Peter Waldo didn't start, but that he followed. If you go back to the biblical times, you find that there was a man named Barnabas that sold everything he had and gave it to the church. And, in the book of Acts. Well, that turned out to be Barnabas in the Bible, and he owned the island of Cyprus, which is right off the coast of Tarsus where Paul was, and they were running around together. He was a very powerful man. And not only that, that island of Cyprus was designated as one of Cleopatra's daughters' inheritance. So there's a lot that we probably don't know about that. So he gave up his position as owner, or as the descendant who would be the heir of all of this material wealth, and said, it's not mine, it belongs to everybody. It's not like he gave it up, he just gave it to the people. And one of the reasons that Peter Waldo did that is because they were going to murder him to get his wealth, and because of his bloodline. But if he became a poor homeless person in the wilderness, hiding in caves. They probably couldn't find him, and all of the wealth that they wanted now belonged to all the people. And in order to get that wealth, they'd have to kill every man, woman, and child. And they said, no problem, we can do that. So they were the same as the Cathars. They just happened to identify with the man that at that time in history led them to give up all that they owned and truly live the Christian life. And this infuriated the Catholic Church, and this is what started the Inquisitions in around 1100 and something. So, Peter Waldo, we know, owned all the cities and towns and villages along the Rhone, which is the valley. And he was the Peter of the valley. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't note the information that Dan Brown came up with in the Holy Blood and Holy Grail. And let me read you this little part just to tell you what the scholars believe or say about everything I'm going to tell you. And the best theories that were ever written down that sort of support what I'm saying is probably in Dan Brown's book. But I'm going to explain that Dan Brown didn't know that the Merovingian kings may have married into the lines of Christ, but they are not the true sanctioned bloodline of Jesus Christ, but that it was simply another infiltration by the barbarians. But in the Holy Blood and Holy Grail, it suggests that Jesus may have survived the crucifixion. Okay, well, yes, he survived. He was raised from the dead and was now immortal. And that Mary Magdalene, pregnant at the event, may have fled to France, where she was protected by a Jewish kingdom at Narbonne, it continues. Okay, Narbonne is a little west from Marseille, along the French coast of the Mediterranean, in that Rhone Valley. According to other accounts, the Grail was brought by the Magdalene to France as early as the 4th century. Legends describe the Magdalene fleeing the Holy Land and being set ashore near Marseille, where, for that matter, her purported relics are still venerated. Further, according to medieval legends, she carried with her to Marseille the Holy Grail, which is in that original language, sang real, meaning holy blood. And what the Holy Grail or the Holy Blood is you could conjecture. It could be the blood line or lineage of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, or it could be a actual cup that some legends have Joseph of Arimathea taking a cup and catching some of the blood of actual Christ, and this blood of Christ, some elixir or whatever, they kept this actual blood somewhere in a cup. I find that to be probably not true, because I don't believe that Jesus or Mary or any of the rest would have wanted to preserve this blood in the form of runny blood, which would have dried up and wouldn't have been blood. And I don't think that anybody could keep blood in a little chalice for very long. You'd have to put it in something to preserve it, and it doesn't make any sense why they would want to preserve it. But I think what you're talking about is the blood in the sense of your lineage. So, in other words, the simple association of Grail and cup was a relatively late development. We're then tantalized by another suggestion that if our hypothesis is correct, the Holy Grail would have been both Jesus' bloodline and descendants, the sang real, of which the Templars were the guardians, and the receptacle or vessel containing Jesus' blood, the womb of Mary Magdalene. That's in the Da Vinci Code. But the veracity of these hypotheses should be taken with a large dose of salt. Okay, this is what they're going to do. They're going to try and tear all these ideas down because they don't have any proof. They can't prove it, so they're going to say it's just all legend and it can't be true. He says there are no accounts of medieval legends of the Grail being brought by Mary Magdalene to France. The earliest legend of her fleeing the Holy Land is of the 13th century. Well, see, they say there are no legend stuff, but they don't know all of the legends. There's another book in the British Library, in their museum, I think it's around the year 1486, where this woman Mary of the line of this Burgundian kings, which is the line we're looking for, At least, it goes back to that line of Valois. She claims in this book that her line of ancestors and kings goes back to Jesus Christ. Well, they probably hadn't heard of that. It's up in the museum in London. Plus, we have the whole rules of the Templars that we have extant that tells you everything that they believed and did. They certainly believed in the tradition of Mary, and they weren't just whistling Dixie. They believed that they were there to preserve this line. It's all in there, so I don't know how you can say it's not. It's just some mere legend. But the earliest legend of her fleeing the Holy Land is of the 13th century. The earliest account of Mary Magdalene's post-ascension life appears in an Anglo-Saxon martyrology of 850. So 850 is going back quite a ways, but, not to the days when Mary lived, of course, in which she retires as a hermit, hidden away in sorrow and love of Christ in a desert cave, a story that derives from the legend of the 5th century penitent harlot Saint Mary of Egypt, who went into the desert to repent of her sins, naked to reject her worldly life, her hair growing down to cover her. As Mary Magdalene dies, a priest gives her the last rites to bury her. By the 11th century, this legend, known later as the Vita Eremitica Beatia Maria Magdalena, had become widespread, and Mary Magdalene's legend became one of the best-known saints. Vitae, after the Abbey of Vézelay in Burgundy, claimed to possess her relics in 1050. This is that I think this is that story I was telling you about, that in 1050 claimed to possess her relics. And not just that, but to be a lineal descendant of Mary and her royal bloodline of her father. So Monsignor Victor Saxer, Doan of Magdalenian scholarship, has traced the development of the legends. To the question of how her body had arrived in Gaul, the faithful were informed that it had been through the love of all-powerful deity. Before the long, however, Vézelay had to come up with something more concrete to explain its possession of the relics. This was the classic holy theft, whereby various versions told of how a monk from Vézelay had been sent to near Aix to retrieve her body where it had been buried, before the Saracens invaded and brought it back to the abbey for safekeeping. The next step of the story related how the body had actually come to Provence. This was the Vita Apostolica, or the apostolic life of Mary Magdalene, elements of which have been used in the Holy Blood, the Holy Grail. Here's Mary Magdalene and various companions, including one Maximinus, landed at Marseille, where they preached the gospel. Mary Magdalene converted the local prince and his wife to Christianity, performed miracles such as helping the previously childless couple to conceive, and restoring the princess to life after being shipwrecked. In a later version, what the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail refers to as according to tradition, as well as certain early church writers, and appears to treat as fact that she is accompanied by Martha and Lazarus, having been put to flight by the Jews in a leaky and rudderless vessel, which, guided by deity, also arrives at Marseille. Martha goes to Tarascon to kill the wicked dragon, which is up in Italy, in the Alps, while Lazarus stays to become Bishop of Marseille. The story is resumed in the compilation known as the Golden Legend by Jacobus de Voranging of 1276, all hagiographical material issued by one small Burgundian abbey, which prompted, as intended, a massive pilgrimage industry, particularly after the invention or discovery of 1259 of heaps of feminine hair, something that would, to the medieval mentalite, confirm that the body was indeed that of Mary Magdalene. Then in 1279, though the intervention of Mary Magdalene herself in the dream, the monks at St. Maximum in Provence discovered her relics in their church, turning the steps of the credulous faithful southwards. The instigator of the discovery of Magdalene's relics at St. Maximum was Charles of Anjou and Salerno, Count of Provence. And here we get to this Anjou. So where do the Moravians come in? Nowhere. In the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, we learn that, if our hypothesis is correct, after fleeing the Holy Land, Jesus' wife and offspring found a refuge in the south of France. and a Jewish community there preserved their lineage. During the 5th century, this lineage appears to have intermarried with the royal line of the Franks, thus engendering the Merovingian dynasty. Well, you see, that's where I think it ends, because a pure line that would not have mixed with the Merovingian dynasty or the Bavarians from the Germanic tribes must be somewhere in the world, and I think I've got evidence where it went, and we'll get to that, whether in today's video or the next. But it isn't the Merovingian line. So they say there is no footnote to this amazing leap in historical speculation, although the occasional factors referred to, such as assassination of Dagobert II in 679, and that despite all efforts to eradicate it, Jesus' bloodline, or at any rate the Merovingian bloodline, survived, in part through the Carolinians. Well, listen, the Carolinians is not where we want to be going. That's the Holy Roman Empire, ruled over by a Jewish bloodline that was brought over from Baghdad of Jeconiah, that married into Charlemagne's aunt line and made a line of kings that then ruled the Holy Roman Empire, and then tried to take over the land of the Languedoc, which was then the Septimania. As you can see here in the Wiktionary, Septimania is 7, an allusion to the 7 cities. So this is the kingdom of the 7 cities, which is interesting. The 7 cities of gold, they're looking for them in America. And we'll show you why that might be here in a minute. Basically, this was the lineage of Jesus that had these 7 cities. They just fled. They didn't want to have a war, but there were people that were left there, probably a lot of Islamic peoples and so forth as well, and other descendants of the people that had been there for centuries. They were also supposed to be Sephardic Jews, but they had this war, but the true descendants of Jesus had already left. And so that's why they sent Cordova to Mexico and North America, in New Mexico where I live, to find the 7 cities, or to find Septimania, or the seat of Christ. And why, pray tell, were they cities of gold? Well, remember the wealth of Peter Waldo, the wealthiest man in Lyon, and owned all these cities and villages and towns along the Rhone, all the way down to Marseille and Montpellier and Narbonne and Arles and so forth. Well, it says he gave up all of his wealth. So where did the people flee? They had all the wealth. So they had to come in the days of Cordova to find the Septimania, or to find the 7 cities of gold, meaning the places where Jesus Christ's seed went, and where they took all their gold and all the treasure, and probably the manuscripts and scriptures, the Holy Textus Receptus, to preserve it. And I don't think they found it. And I think it's still here, near where I live. But that's a theory. So they're going to say, oh, well, this is all legend. There's no proof of this, and we don't have any lineage. We don't know who's who. So I could spend the rest of my days trying to figure if there's any proof and go through all the history and see if I could somehow find an actual lineage of Jesus Christ down to some particular king line in Europe or France or something. And I don't think we're going to be able to do that. But I do think that the Holy Spirit has caused certain things to remain in history that we can use as clues and maybe more or less definitively close this speculation that it was a group of individuals that didn't want anything to do with the kingship and ruling and always fled. And therefore they probably fled to, as we said in the other video, some of them married into other lines and they were ruthless and fought wars, but they were more like, I think they got involved with the Bavarian line, which was this Jewish line that believed in the law of Moses and genocide, and that's not the line we want to follow. However, they were probably allowed to do what they were doing to colonize the world and subjugate them from some kind of cannibalism to some order of the law of Moses, which was a step up for many people. All throughout China and Persia, they conquered and established this government of law from the precedents of the law of Moses. But there had to be one group that was trying to get away from all of that, go someplace where they could establish a land of justice and freedom for all, and create the New Jerusalem, which is what the legends tell us that John the Presbyter did, taking Mary and everybody with him. So it's a ruse trying to follow these people over there in Europe. But what we can say is that at the time of the Waldensian persecution, we certainly could understand why they were trying to get rid of these people, because they had this information. That's why we don't have any records. So they burned them out, killed them. But we have this. We have the man who was very wealthy, who owned all of the Rhone Valley, and was the man Peter of the Valley, who claimed to be his group descended from the apostles and from Jesus Christ. So I don't think that's a legend. I think that's more or less history. We've got historical facts that show the Waldensian Inquisition. There's, in my mind, no question that Peter Waldo is the same character in real life that is told in the romance novel Percival. Now, it's interesting, there's quite a few people from this line that they'll spell their name Vox, which is the old French way of saying my name, Vose, which is also valley, or probably comes from the people of the valley, and doesn't refer to any one particular man, but the lineage of Christ. So we have Clara Vox that's in this story with Dan Brown and different Voxes. Let me show you some of that. So here is some history of the House of Valois, Burgundy. So if you look up in Wikipedia under the House of Valois, Burgundy, it's just a bunch of names and stuff that would bore you. But the term Valois, Dukes of Burgundy, is employed to refer to the dynasty which began after King John II of France granted the French Duchy of Burgundy to his youngest son Philip the Bold in 1363. Well, I think at this point, the House of Valois starts intermingling with these other lines from the Bavarians. The Kingdom of France, I don't think, is the same as the Kingdom of Languedoc. It would take a lot of digging and reading to wrap your mind around all this history. But there was a 100-year war, and what could you imagine this 100-year war would be? It would be one group trying to kill another group, and it was a long, protracted battle. But what two groups do we have? We have the Cathars, and we have the other people run by Satan, the barbarian group that's trying to take over these Germanic tribes that have taken over Rome and are now trying to, and you can read the whole history, and I've done it. It's all about the Holy Roman Empire trying to destroy the kingdom of the Languedoc and supplant them. And for years they could not do it. They were getting help from the Islamic Moors and so forth through a time, but they couldn't defeat them for a long time. But then we end up down to this 100-year war. And it says the dukes rivaled their French royal cousins, uniting a great number of French and imperial fiefs under their rule. However, their plans to establish an autonomous kingdom ultimately failed when the last duke, Charles the Bold, sparked the Burgundian Wars, and he was killed in the Battle of Nancy. The final ruler of the dynasty was her daughter Mary. Now you see, King John II and his final daughter named Mary, they were definitely looking back at the history of John the Presbyter and Mary Magdalene. So on her death in 1482, her lands outside of France, passed their eldest son, Philip the Handsome, to become the Habsburg Netherlands. Okay, now we're back up in the 10 tribes. They've transferred this. They've wiped out these people. They've won their war. They probably married into the line and then took that trophy. Oh, we've got the blood of Christ in us now. So now they took that up to the Habsburg dynasty, up by the Netherlands. So this is the Holy Roman Empire that's trying to take over the world. And now they've got France. So you go down here, there's the former Frankish kingdom of Burgundy had been divided into an east and west Frankish part by the 843 Treaty of Verdun, while the eastern part evolved to the kingdom of Burgundy. Arles is supposedly where Mary landed in one part of the legend near Marseille, and that included a free county of Burgundy and was incorporated into the Holy Roman Empire in 1032. So once it's incorporated into the Holy Roman Empire, it is no longer the kingdom of Languedoc. Now notice 1032. Well, we get Peter Waldo, or Peter of the Valley, who had all this wealth, who gave it all to the poor, and then the Great Inquisitions. So they won the war by killing the royal descents and scattering their bloodlines and murdering all these kings and maybe marrying into them in some way. But now there's one guy who's got a lot of wealth, whose name is the same as the prince that's in the romance, who is, I don't think there's any question, the actual lineal descendant, the prince, who's no longer a king but a pauper. And all the people of the valley and the people of the Alps, the Waldensians, loved him. And this is why they had to have this great inquisition to stamp out not just the line of Christ and their kings, but that was a mandatory thing, but also their beliefs about how they were the descendants of Jesus Christ. Now, I'll tell you why this might be more important than we can even imagine. You've probably heard of this whole thing about the Rh negative blood, and people wonder, well, where does this blood come from? It's negative, meaning it doesn't have this rhesus monkey blood. Well, if there is one line or bloodline in the world that wouldn't have some characteristics as other humans, that when that line of individuals that's got that blood has relations with somebody who doesn't have that blood, the mother actually tries to reject the child like it's not even human. And it's interesting, as I was thinking of all of this, and yesterday I was scrolling, and all of a sudden this lady with the TikTok that I've seen and I've talked about before that's digging into all these deep things, she says she's been working on this too, about this holy, and somebody had just asked me earlier that day about it, and I gave them an answer, which I'm going to give you here. But after I was telling my friend this information, boom, this other lady, and I don't remember her name. I'd seen her before. I like this lady. She digs deep and gets some very good information. But it was completely shocking to me that what I had just told this friend of mine about the Rh negative, which I thought I was the only one that had ever thought of it. And I think few have ever thought of it. I don't know if anybody's talking about it, although I've been, since then I've looked around and I see that everybody's talking about this Rh negative thing. So I'm sure somebody's thought of it, but I had never seen anybody talking about it. And it's just like out of nowhere. I didn't look it up. I wasn't searching for it. It just popped up. And she started giving the exact same idea and theory, I guess, that I had proposed. And that is that instead of like George Norrie and all these other people are trying to say that there are some off-planet species, or it's the Nephilim, or something that, this is what people have been saying, which we don't have any evidence for, other than Genesis 6:4, which just said the Nephilim were in the earth in those days. We have no idea who they were. But, and as you know, guys, I've already debunked all of that, because these individuals that were the divine beings or the Anunnaki that all these stories are telling us seem to be talking about our patriarchs, and we've covered all of that in other videos. But there is one person that I know and absolutely believe was on the earth that was supposedly born of a virgin and was the son of deity. Now, if Jesus really was born of a virgin and has some perfected body after he achieved this enlightenment and had a child, then it would seem that the children of Jesus Christ could be why we have this Rh negative blood in the populations of the world. It just so happens that the area in the world that has the most of these Rh negative blood is the people in southern France, around the Languedoc. I don't know that that could be a coincidence. It seems to me that there is some sort of infusion of some particular bloodline that is slightly different than the rest of the world. Everybody else in the world has this rhesus monkey blood, except this Basque people, which are in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and especially down in the Languedoc area. And so a lot of Celtic peoples, which, by the way, the Druids were there in Gaul before all this happened. We were just talking about this. They were the original people that were there. And the story and the legend says that Jesus and Mary Magdalene's lineage came in mixed with them. And we've done videos before about what we've talked about, that the Druids were of the children of Israel that had gone in their way. So all the people there were, and as all the people of the world are, all of them are descendants of Israel. But in this particular area, there seems to be a different kind of blood. And maybe this is what the legends mean when they use the term the Holy Grail, or the holy blood of Christ that was to be protected. So this is where some interesting information will be helpful. This article here is about Colonies, another ancient Jewish colony in America. It says, in the 1920s, in Tucson, Arizona, not far from me, were found objects and writings in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew with both Catholic and Jewish ritual objects and symbols. Cyclone Conde describes this discovery in his book, Colonies, a Roman Jewish colony in America, from the time of Charlemagne. Well, that's what we're talking about, the Charlemagne. Through Alfred the Great. Convoy and other researchers are amazed at the mixture of Jewish, Christian, and Kabbalistic objects and symbols. However, this very much fits this period in the 8th century, when in the Carolingian Empire there is a Jewish principality in southern France called Septimania, ruled by Theodoric of Narbonne, Macartodorus ben Judah Magnario Ameri. This article go on to posit the theory that America got its name from this man who ruled Septimania in Europe, in France, Theodoric. That's that individual from a branch, which is one of the branches of the line of Anjou, but mixed with these Bavarian line that Charlemagne brought from Baghdad. He brought a Jewish seed from Jeconiah, and the Carolingian bloodline then mixed with this Valois and created this Theodoric, or the Merovingian line. So here's that Narbonne, and now he tells you just what I just said. Many members of this family, descended from the exilarchs of Babylon, embraced a Jewish form of Catholicism, while other members remained outwardly Orthodox Jews. So I think that the line of Christ was already rooted out and went with Joseph of Arimathea over to America, which will read to you that part of the story here in a minute. But I want to show you this other part. These two guys are always trying to vie for power wherever they go. The Callalist record speaks of a Theodorus as the leader of many peoples who leave the Roman lands for Callalus in 775. Convey and others believe that the Theodorus is the Jewish leader in the city of Rome. However, this is too literal reading of the term Rome. Theodorus is none other than the Jewish king of Septimania. Septimania is kind of what the Languedoc was then called after these barbarians came down and defeated their lineal descendants. But the people of the Septimania area still believed in the teachings, the Gnostic teachings, and they were Kabbalists. And as we showed all the way down to their final leader, Peter of Waldo, where they were rooted out in the Inquisition. So, a Roman Jewish state in southern France, he is the son of the first Jewish king of Septimania, also called Theodoric. You see, it'd be easy for me to say, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. A Jewish line, maybe it's from Jesus, there in southern France, that came to America. Oh, that would be perfect, right? That would fit what that would fit the narrative that I had told you. But you must understand, this is not a pure line from Christ. And this is why it's all about colonizing and war and murder. So, this Theodoric Amory de Narbonne, Theodorus Dietrich Theodoric Amory, I don't know, just different ways to say the same name, is also known as Theodoric King of Saxony and as Namus Duke of Bavaria. See what I mean? This is no longer the seat of Christ, but they have now been taken over by the Franks and the Bavarians and the Goths. And they come from the area around Bavaria and the Dukes of Bavaria. And they had conquered the people of Jesus. Now, why did they then, as soon as they conquered the people of Jesus, immediately come to America? Maybe they were on the tails of those who fled, and they were trying to track them down somewhere at the extremity of the world and root out every last child born to Jesus. So we may have to pick up the battle here in America. But he and his brothers were great warrior Davidic princes of the time of Charlemagne. Professor Arthur Zuckerman, in his book A Jewish Princedom in Feudal France, confuses him with his father, who bears the same Frankish name, Theodoric and Amory. On the death of his father, Macer Theodoric, in about 765 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric becomes the Western Exarch and leader of all the Jews of the revived Western Roman Empire of Charlemagne. So now this royal line of Jeconiah that Charlemagne got from Baghdad married his aunt and ends up becoming a royal branch and is related to Charlemagne, and these Jews take over the Western Roman Empire. And of course, Charlemagne is the founder of the Holy Roman Empire. In 775 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric reconquered the American Empire of Callalus. So they were calling the American Empire Callalus. Callalus was ruled by the Silvanus Toltexes, Solomon the Builder. The Toltexes, Solomon the Builder. The hereditary ruler of this former Jewish-ruled Roman colony. Callalus was founded in the 1st century BC by the Babylonian exarch known as Silvanus Ogam, or Silvanus Barbo, Solomon II, Babylonian exarch, Nazi of Maru, ruler of Sumer, or Somerset, in Britain. A great Roman Jewish ruler, soldier, and ancestor of the Swan Knights, the Barber Hakatzin. He also had a fleet of trading vessels known as the Ships of Solomon, or the Swan Boats. The ships are shaped like a swan, with its sails like the wings of a beautiful gliding white swan. After the defeat of the Silvanus Toltexes, the members of the royal family were sent back to Europe, where they were under the protection of Nehemiah Theodorus and his family. The legends of Dune and Ogier are based on the activities of this family descended from Dun, Antigone, Ogier, and Sylvanus Barbo, Solomon Barber. The legends of Ogier and Dane, son of Godfred Cadrod, and Dun de Mayence actually refer to the Tuatha De Danann, or Dunan, who are also known as the Manan, or the Maine of America, where the giant ogre heads of the Olmecs are found. So, if that was indeed Joseph of Arimathea's mine, his tin mine, down in Peru, and there down in Mexico around Veracruz where these Olmec heads are found, then this other Jewish group came over and defeated them there, and perhaps all these heads that they find are heads that these ruthless barbarians beheaded, and in a great slaughter and genocide, they had to flee again. And perhaps that's then why they moved north up into Mexico. Now, you might be wondering, okay, where are all the Nephites at this time? Well, they were all wiped off by 500 AD. This is after 500 AD in the Middle Ages here in America. So we're probably dealing with Lamanites and Neokites or whoever else. But now we've got this having something to do with Ireland. Well, they left France, went to Britain and Ireland, and then to America. Perhaps along the way they created the Tuatha De Dananns. Well, that's from the tribe of Dan, who is from Samson, who is both from Judah and Dan. So they were certainly Jews, and they had their Jewish religion with them. The Bible tells you that Dan went on his ships and took with him the religion of Judah and some Levites. So, yes, the Tuatha De Danann now, that most people think is a group of individuals that left Egypt before the Exodus that left with Moses, went up, a tribe of Dan went up to Ireland. Well, this seems to indicate that whoever these people were in Ireland, they were actually people fleeing from Septimania in France. I think the legends about the Tuatha De Danann are fairly clear, so it's more likely that when they got to Ireland, they found their brothers, and they had similar histories and records, and they joined together. And so they fled the Languedoc, some of these people from Septimania, with Theodoric, and went to Ireland and found the Tuatha De Dananns, and they together left on a ship to Mexico. So the Jews of this ancient Roman Jewish kingdom of Rhoda were also known as the Rhodans or the Radonites, and were great Jewish merchants who controlled the ancient trade routes. Now, these Jewish merchants wouldn't have possibly anything to do with Jesus. Not if it was a true order of the poor or the Knights of St. John. But perhaps some distant relatives that were all now mixed with the barbarians and who had been infiltrated. It's too much of a coincidence that everywhere you go and find anything pure and simple, that these individuals want to infiltrate it. If they have a knight's order to preserve the Holy Grail, they infiltrate it and murder the Holy Grail. If it is a group in Ireland, they got to go up there and infiltrate there. If it's America, they got to come to America. And it seems that if they did arrive near where the Olmecs were, that they couldn't have been compatible with those minds of Joseph of Arimathea. So we're going to see about this Joseph of Arimathea here. It says the Rhone Valley, that's that Rhone Valley that we're talking about, the valley around the Rhone, 169 cities, towns, and villages, that was literally owned by Peter Waldo, or Peter of the Valley. And the river named after these Jewish Radonite merchants who used the Rhone Valley as a base for their trading empire. That's got to be the Peter Waldo people. However, it seems like somebody had infiltrated and taken it over, because remember, Peter Waldo gave up all his wealth and gave it to the poor. It was these barbarians and these Goths that came down and murdered all of the Waldensians and pushed them out. and then obviously took over their trading empire and mixed with whatever bloodlines there were there and took over the bloodlines in the Merovingian line and so forth. So here we have this going on, that these same people that were originally the children of Jesus along the Rhone Valley is now mixed with these Bavarians, and this Theodoric, which was a Goth, and many of them settled in Ireland. Well, if they had gone to Ireland, were they being pushed out? Did they consider themselves more in harmony with Peter Waldo? Did they flee with the Waldensians? They may have had some Waldensian blood. They certainly must have been Gnostic or Catharism of belief, because, which is what the Waldensians were. They had to have been Cathars because they were Gnostics. And this thing that they dug up here in Tucson, Arizona, that showed this Theodore and his group that landed there, they had Gnostic memorabilia, Hebrew, Greek, and Catholic, and Jewish. So they were exactly fitting the bill of Christian Jewish people that were Cathars and Gnostic. There's no question about it. They found Kabbalistic materials there. But according to this history, according to this person, they were also at this point mixed with these Bavarians. But notice this, it says that those who then settled in Ireland in the 1st century united with their cousins descended from St. Joseph of Arimathea. St. Joseph of Arimathea would have been one of the individuals that went with Mary Magdalene and originally settled the Rhone Valley, which now matches up with the research that this man has done. So Isaac Calonimus, the son of Nehemiah Theodoric of Repenrine, was also known as Isaac the Radonite. Ibn Cordoba, account of the Radonites stresses their source somewhere beyond the Western Sea in the land of the Franks. In the 5th century, Calalus was part of the revived Western Empire of King Arthur, a descendant of the Swan Knights. Ho, buddy. So you see, this is all mixed up with the line of Jesus and some others that were cousins. And it does go back to King Arthur. And this is what these Swan Knights were. By the 8th century, due to admixture with the American Indians, the state had reverted to paganism. Well, that's their words. Nehemiah Theodorus led an expedition in 775 to return Calalus to Jewish and Roman rule. He conquered the ancient city of Rhoda, and the Jewish law was restored. After 4 years in 779 AD, Nehemiah Theodorus left Calalus for his kingdom in France, which he had left in the hands of his brother Guillaume de Gallon. He then appointed a British Davidic prince, Jacob, as the Jewish king of Calalus, as regent for his young son Israel, who was married to Jacob's daughter. Jacob was a descendant of King Arthur, as well as the Jewish royal family of Bernicia. Jacob was the leader of the British Jewish settlers in Calalus. The Roman Jewish settlers of Calalus in the 8th century were made up of two main groups, the Latin Jewish group from the Frankish Empire and the British Jewish group from the British Isles. I think the British Isle group was those who had fled already and would probably be more along the lines of the true descendants of Christ. However, they also have their roots in this area around the Languedoc. So the Olmec ogre image was the ogre is based on Nehemiah Theodoric Hamaker, reigned in Germany until his death in 790. He was one of Charlemagne's leading advisors because Charlemagne brought this line in. He learnt about the land of Calalus from Gerard, a member of the Swan Knight family that came to Charlemagne's court in a swan boat. He married Adelis, a daughter of Nehemiah. The Swan Knight's ancestors had come to Ireland from Calalus in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, and intermarried with the descendants of Nathan the Red, Nathan the Roden, a grandson of Mar, Joseph of Arimathea. Mar, Joseph, was a grandson of Sylvanus Ogham, or Brabo Barber, the great Roman Jewish warrior who defeated the giant American emperor of Ogham, or the Ogier called Druon, Antigone. In later European legends, Druon means oak and describes the stature of Antigone. The Ogon script was named for Sylvanus Ogham, Solomon II, Shalom, Salum, who brought it from America to Europe. Ogham or Ogham is the legendary home of the ogres, and I believe that they refer to the Olmec culture of Mexico. The Swan Knight. Joseph's grandson Nathan had traveled to America with his kinsman Nathaniel Bartolome, Saint Bartholomew. Nathaniel was a grandson of Sylvanus Ogham, the Jewish ruler of Calalis. Solomon II, ben Nathan Zesutra, was succeeded as Babylonian exilarch by his son Nathan II Uqba, as ruler of Somerset, and the 10 Mines by his son Mar Chunya, the father of Joseph of Arimathea, and the ruler of Calalis by his son Mar Ptolemy, or Bartholomew, the father of Saint Bartholomew. Saint Bartholomew is remembered in America as Quetzalcoatl. Well, I think he's getting a few things mixed up, because Quetzalcoatl, as we know, was Jesus Christ, who came after the crucifixion and appeared to the people there. But as you can see, at least all of this information has some point of reference somewhere, that somebody's trying to put this together. The white bearded priest. His son Elihud ha-Barber was the father of Sylvanus Ptolemy, the ruler of Attila. Now, Attila is probably where we get Atlas, or the Atlantis, or the fallen Atlantis was the ancient kingdom of Atlas. And that's America, which is something we've been saying all along. The Lord Master Baal of Anahuac, Anu, Mexico, and Calalis, North America. Oh, so Calalis is North America. On Nehemiah Theodorus' return to the Frankish Roman Empire in 779, he left his brother as the Jewish ruler of Septimania, and he became the Jewish ruler of the German lands of Bavaria and Saxony in Germany under Charlemagne's authority. His son Isaac Kalonimus, also called William of Gellone, like his uncle, later in life with his wife became Catholics, and he is remembered as Saint William of Gellone. He has been confused with his uncle Nathan Kalonimus, who was also known as William of Gellone, and Toulouse, who died fighting the Muslims. Saint William Isaac of Gellone and Toulouse, as a new Christian, went to visit his brother Israel of Calalis and converted him to his mystical Jewish brand of Catholicism, as practiced by the royal and noble families of the Western Europe. Israel I had become the king of Calalis in 785, and on the death of his father-in-law Jacob in 800, Isaac Kalonimus and his 2 converted brothers Benjamin and Judah went to reinforce the colony with 700 soldiers. Israel I and many of the people embraced Catholicism under the teaching of the 3 converso brothers of the Makar dynasty Magnarvim. Israel I established his brothers as high priest of Calalis from the time Calalis became a Jewish Catholic state, where the ritual and spirituality derived from both Jewish and Catholic sources. So, Israel Gireat reigned for 67 years until 852, when he was succeeded by his son Israel II. St. William Isaac of Gellone was 2 years in America, which was also known as the Isle of Barzil, or Brazil, which I guess means iron. And from this time, he also was known as Brasilia, or Barzele. But anyway, I'm not going to read this whole thing. But the information in this, we're going to explore here further. But I don't want this to be just me sitting here reading something. We need to try to put all of this together. And so we're going to have to look at some facts. But anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. I know this is tedious reading all of this, but if you can stick with me, we're going to get to some truth, some understanding as to what this whole things about, because there's some deep mysteries here we'd like to understand, like Septimania and the 7 cities, and why Jesus' descendants left there and where they went and why. So, long over an hour here. Going to go ahead and let you go. We'll see you guys tomorrow. May the Lord bless you. His grace and peace be with you. Have a good one.